Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Let's Be Honest, the sort of hospitality podcast that's most definitely about people. As you know by now, I'm fairly partial to a double episode. However, today it's going to be a one-off, but a bit longer. I'm sure I could squeeze in an inappropriate joke there, but I think I'll leave that till later. The reason for the possibly exaggerated length, not for the first time, is because the episode is entitled The History of the World, so it kind of can't be rushed. So today, we're going to talk about the past, because the past is today, which means that we must be listening to this in the future, which we totally are. 2092 to be precise. There once was a man. No ordinary man, I might add. Was he a German? No, he wasn't. Was he Superman? No, he wasn't. He was just an old man. But as it turns out, he was as wise as the day is long, and there was a pretty good argument to suggest that he is one of the reasons that we are sitting here today. Welcome to Let's Be Honest. The year is 2092, and I'm definitely not Wize Oldman. Alright then, let's get to it. Good morning, class.
Good morning.
Today's lecture is on the history of the world. Now, the piece I'm going to talk to you about today was allegedly written 60 years ago in 2032, just right after tea time. And as the author of this piece states, the world had changed. 4 years earlier, in 2028, hospitality and many other businesses were on the brink of extinction. It was a horrifying and worrying time. If you are lucky enough to have grandparents still alive, ask them what happened. You see, that's the thing with the word extinction. Most people think it's just regarding dinosaurs and quotes from classic old movies like Jurassic Park. I know. Can you believe that movie is 100 years old next year? It's true. Movies, they were something people used to watch back then. They used to sit for up to 3 hours at a time, unlike the condensed films of today known as the 8-minute movie. Well, class, you may ask how businesses and especially hospitality arrived at the brink of extinction, and did we survive? We are all here now, listening to me talk, so yes, we did survive. However, it was touch and go for a while. Our survival was mainly down to one man. This man had a dream and a revolutionary idea to save humanity. Yes, it was that big, and if you asked him at the time just how big it was, he would have almost certainly said that it was massive. I'll tell you his name later. Why don't we start with how we got into this mess? I'm going to take you back even further, back to 2020. There was this thing called a pandemic. Some say it was created by the government. Some say it was just a big fuck-off cold, and that you should just take an aspirin, have a bit of a lie down, and then grow a pair. Then there were the others that even suggested that a person, whose name was never exposed, just shagged a bat in China. What actually happened? Nobody knows to this day. Years after, some even say that it was the work of aliens. It was also suggested that it was the work of an 8'3" man from Australia, of all places, called Than. At the time, he gained the nickname Than Oz. They made movies about him too. Hey, I don't write it. I just read it. As I say, nobody knows the real truth. So whatever the reason for 2020, it existed. And what it did was tear the world apart. Well, not the world. The world was fine because the world will always turn and regenerate itself. It tore people apart. That's why these days, in 2092, voting is not a thing anymore. It was abolished years ago. Why? Well, people just couldn't be trusted, could they? It felt like people just disagreed on everything. At the time, some of you may have said that you disagree with the fact that people were disagreeing, and that you find that the person suggesting it was a little disagreeable for suggesting such a thing, thus proving the point, of course. There was no fight that people were not fighting. Some were just arguing for the sake of it. It's like some people were not happy unless they were unhappy, and they wanted to drag the rest of society down with them. It was truly a crazy time. Every reality show, whether it be something simple like building a house, once a lovely pastime, creating a dish in a cooking show, or tailoring a nice garden, it all became about fighting, backstabbing, and drama. These actions then flowed over into society and started to become the norm. Oh God, it was a terrible time. People were shagging on islands, all in the name of love, supposedly. They were marrying at first sight, just in the name of causing friction and giving the great public something to comment on. Where were they commenting? Well, mostly over their Aperol Spritz and $25 crushed avocado on sourdough brunch.
Sir, what was brunch?
Brunch? Oh, well, that was a load of bollocks. That didn't last. That was a meal that was invented between breakfast and lunch because there clearly wasn't enough meals already in the day, and it justified eating again.
Is that why we were over-consuming back in the day?
Well, that was one of the reasons, of course.
But what kind of person was eating brunch?
Oh, just people who wanted to be seen, taking photos of their food. That was about it, really. It's okay. You don't need to worry. You probably know about it now because it all died out around 2040 because there was a world avocado shortage. To be honest, even when they sent Z-list celebrities into a jungle, you would have thought their main goal was to survive and not get eaten. But no, fighting, conniving and colluding was the name of the game. That was us. That was people. That's what we were becoming, this over-consuming, whinging society. Here's something else. Back then, they were even putting people from all walks of life in a big house for weeks and weeks on end, in the hope that a fight would start, somebody would say something racist or shaming. Also, as I'm sure you all know, class, later on, all those shows were banned due to a worldwide study. The conclusion being that it was making people stupid just by watching the shows. The national IQs were going down by as much as 40%, and a culture was being created. The author also writes, I remember all those years ago feeling sorry for any woman that was called Karen. It was 2022, and I remember Karen was basically a white woman who was entitled and a little bit of a pain in the arse. In Australia, they went even one step further. They created a restaurant chain, I think chain is a sort of loose term there, where the staff were allowed to be rude to customers. So all those nasty backstabbing people on TV that people were watching from afar, well, that clearly wasn't enough. Some people, some strange people, wanted to immerse themselves in the real experience. I know, it's crazy, but it happened. Clearly, there wasn't enough drama in day-to-day life for people back then. Yet again, it's all okay. As I'm sure you all know by all your history books, as mentioned, the shows and the Karen restaurant didn't last long. But at the time, it was a real worry, as it was almost saying it's okay to be rude and nasty to other humans. It was arguably getting to the point where being rude and being stupid was becoming celebrated. At the time, hospitality staff were so fed up by rude customers that working in a place like Karen's was almost their moment in the sun. They could let off a bit of steam and give it back to that horrible wanker that often made their life hell. You know, the person that actually paid their wages, the customer. I think we would all agree, looking back, that that is literally biting the hand that feeds. Wouldn't you say? So, between 2020 and 2022, businesses were dying out. Hospitality was one of those businesses that was especially hit hardest. In fact, years later, in 2028, the word hospitality was taken out of the dictionary because it just didn't mean what it used to mean, which was the friendly and generous reception and entertainment of guests, visitors, or strangers. That's what it used to mean. It was a very, very sad day. At the time, people just didn't know what to believe. Some were angry and dug their heels in, pretty much on every matter possible. Some just did as they were told, again, driving a wedge through the heart of society. So around the time we are talking about, the world went through some pretty big changes. Also, one of the industries that was hit, as mentioned, was hospitality. And one of the problems was that there was just not enough staff to go around. Now, how could this have happened? How could there not be enough staff? Well, there were a number of reasons for this. One was that there was certainly less foreign workers moving between countries. What this meant was that many venues just had to close their doors, and the ones that did stay open couldn't open the 6 or 7 days a week that they were before. They just didn't have enough staff. They couldn't cope. The irony in all of that was going back even further, pre-2020, lots of people from their own countries would often complain that foreign people were taking their jobs. I know, it's hard to believe, right? Then when all of those travellers and foreign students didn't exist anymore because they couldn't travel, lots of those native people either didn't want the job that they were complaining was stolen from them, or they said, hang on, you don't have enough staff, so I'm going to ask for more money. It's true, it happened. I know, you all look really shocked. What's the word you're searching for there, class?
Is it mercenary?
Yes, it is. Well done. That word is still in the dictionary. Seems that will never go out of fashion, not while people exist in the world anyway. So what happened? That's right. Businesses were going out of business. Then the shit really hit the fan. Those customers who complain that we should give jobs to local people or complain that the waiter couldn't speak English or wasn't good enough, well, now they couldn't get their Chinese hand-stretched noodles, their sushi roll, or even their nice bit of quiche and a cheeky Pinot Noir on a Wednesday night. Because the restaurant was closed due to lack of fucking staff. Bummer. They couldn't even get their takeaway delivered. No staff to deliver it. Even given the little man an electric scooter couldn't cover the demand. Huge bummer. I guess the takeaway from that, no pun intended, was that be careful what you wish for, mixed in with don't be a narrow-minded twat, I guess. Also, let's not forget the member of staff that did have a job and only a year earlier, in, let's say, 2019, was complaining that they couldn't get enough hours in work. Well, now they also ended up having a be careful what you wish for moment. Now they had too many hours. I know what you're thinking now, class. The irony of it all. History's funny, isn't it? Sorry, what was your question? You have a question at the back? Go ahead, please.
Were people stupid back then?
That's a great question. Yes.
What? All of them were stupid?
No, of course not. Only a small percentage was stupid, but they did their best to ruin it for everybody. Their voice was louder, probably because they were often quite angry. I mean, let's face it, throughout history, there have been people that really don't have much to say or fail to offer a solid, coherent argument. Those people tended to shout and throw their arms around just to get their vague point over. The great ones, they never did that. They never shouted or jumped or waved their arms around. Mandela, Churchill, Gandhi, Darth Vader, Stephen Hawkins. Also, because of all the things that were happening, only to young people of course, many of them were taking to social media to moan just how hard life was.
So, what was Facebook?
Facebook? Yeah, I think that folded around 2030. I believe the founder went to prison. Crimes against humanity, I think, was the charge, but hey, don't quote me on that. The author writes that he recalled a moment in 2022. He could see where the industry and people were heading. A member of staff from Starbucks actually locked himself in a storeroom and started crying uncontrollably because they had to do an 8-hour shift at the weekend and that it was just too busy. One of the problems, he stated, was that customers kept coming in to spend money. Shocking. How did he cope? This person was allegedly a student and was scheduled for 25 hours a week. I know, class, it's a lot. I mean, how do you cope with working 25 hours a week? I mean, when do you get a chance to sleep? chase Pokemon or play Fortnite. As stated, this resulted in them crying in a storeroom, and of course the video at the time went viral. Again, I know what you're thinking, listening to this in 2092. Viral? That doesn't sound very good. However, you would be wrong to think that. Viral in those days was a good thing. By the way, for those of you who don't know, all those years ago, Starbucks was a sort of woke organisation that served this warm, beige, tasteless piss, passing it off as coffee. Later, they would be sued. It never was coffee. You can use your imagination to what you think they were serving. At the time, it just seemed like there was no control. People could take a word, change that word, and now the word did not mean what it used to. Instead of just using a new word, what was on a Wednesday might now not be what it is on a Thursday, because a small percentage of people made it so. As I say, crazy, crazy times. If you didn't address somebody using the words that they chose to describe themselves, you could get in a lot of trouble. And because of that, people stopped communicating with each other. People were afraid to approach one another.
What about dating?
Yeah, good one. That was a very funny joke. No, as we all know, that dating died out years ago. That's why we have the sexy Funtime Pleasure Pod Corporation now. People then, around that time, were even starting to deface famous works of art with eggs, flour, and even gluing their face to some paintings. Again, the irony at the time, these people that were doing this kind of thing were climate activists, but they were funded by the granddaughter of an oil tycoon. Shall we say it all again? Ah, the irony. Anyway, that part was really neither here nor there. It was just to highlight the crazy time that was the early 20s. Not to be confused, of course, with the 1920s where, I don't know, all they had to deal with was the start of the Great Depression, huge percentages of people living below the poverty line, and the reinvention of the KKK.
Wasn't that fast food chicken, sir?
No, that was KFC. This was far worse than chicken. This was a group based on pure evil. But hey, they all died, which worked out well for everybody. I mean, that's nothing compared to what happened in 2022. I don't know if it's true, because this isn't in the book, but Facebook went down for 3 hours on a Tuesday afternoon once. And the weather was a bit hotter one day than it was on the same day the year before. I don't know, maybe it's just an urban myth. In a nutshell, the author writes back then, we were fucked.
But what about hospitality? What was the solution?
All right, I'm getting to that. Do you have somewhere to be? Jeez. Let's take TV shows. People loved them back in the day. There was a very popular one, certainly in the USA, called Dr. Phil. I don't think he was a real doctor. He looked more like an overweight Lego policeman at the same time sounding like a cowboy. As I say, it was a very confusing time. Dr. Phil was famous for having trashy Americans on his show, the kind of people that lived in houses on wheels at the time. But even he said that the questions that people were writing in with had changed. He stated that in 21, 22, they were now saying, what's going to happen to us? Are we going to be okay? We are worried about the future. When idiots that write into a Lego policeman masquerading as a doctor worry, then we should all be worried. People's attitude was becoming a concern.
Was it a grave concern?
Yes, is there any other kind? So, up is down, black is white, women are men, and men can have babies. Allegedly. However, back in hospitality land, things were not much better. Small businesses were getting smaller, as in there were less of them. They could just not afford to function. Rent was going up, as was the cost of product, and then one of the biggest costs of all was the staff costs. The venues, again, just couldn't afford to stay open. The issue with all of that was that, as a society, we were left with these huge, soulless venues. No atmosphere, just filled with faceless people. A bit like a cross between an airplane hangar and Arsenal's Emirates Stadium. By the way, Arsenal was a football team back in 2022, and football then was a contact sport consisting of two halves with men and women in separate teams. The Americans, bless them, they got hold of the game and they started to put men and women in the same team. And well, you know, 4 quarters, a game that's longer than a German opera, lots of hot dogs, and no swearing in the crowd, just in case somebody felt profiled. Even the great football songs were banned for being offensive. No more would you hear classics like "You're Going Home in a Fucking Ambulance," or maybe "Your Shit, Ah." That was also very popular at the time. The family favourite "Who's the Wanker in the Black?", referring to the referee, of course, and the all-time classic "Posh Spice Takes It Up the Arse." It was a damn shame. The author writes at the time that there was this guy, Wize Old Man. We will come back to him properly in a minute. But he posed a question once that it's told, when it was suggested, it went down like a cross between a cold cup of sick and a $10 hooker. Both those things are bad, by the way. He said in 2019, a staff member in hospitality was paid around $29 per hour. This was in Australia at the time. Then the pandemic happened. Fast forward to 2022 when the world was just getting back on its feet. Staff were all of a sudden asking for anything upwards of $45 an hour. His question at the time was, are you $16 per hour better at your job than you were 2 years ago? Also basing his question on the fact that in the last 2 or 2.5 years, really not much work or training had been performed. Venues could once have 10 staff working on a Friday night offering great service, but could now only afford 5 because the staff costs were just so high, which of course resulted in poorer service or, as mentioned earlier, total closure or just opening a few days a week. It was kind of a vicious cycle. What to do. So this is what happened. There was this podcast.
What was a podcast?
Oh, a podcast were lots and lots of people, mainly talking bollocks, sitting around in groups, sounding like they were having a great time, because people want a great time, don't they? For a while, people seemed to give a shit. It was just another way to have an opinion in the hope that their opinion would be validated and they would feel, valued on some level. End of the day, podcasts, they ended just as quick as they arrived. Saying that, there was this one podcast called Let's Be Honest with Wize Old Man, or it could have been Wize Oldman. I suspect that wasn't his real name anyway. Now, this guy had allegedly been in the industry for over 40 years, and he saw where the industry that he loved was heading. He was quite rightly concerned, and he created a podcast because he genuinely cared. It actually became all a little bit too much for Wize. He sent a letter to an extremely rich and influential gentleman at the time called Elon Musk, who at the time owned the moon. Wize needed to think big, which is why he contacted the biggest thinker of them all. Elton was certainly an outside of the universe kind of thinker. He suggested a solution that would help small businesses change the attitude and create a culture, a new one. Hopefully, a better one. He suggested that all young people should do 1 year's national service. However, not in the army, but in hospitality. You may remember reading about this in your other history books. It was a huge success at the time. Just like in the army decades before, young, disillusioned, and dysfunctional people were going into the army and then coming out with a can-do attitude. Some countries like Austria and Switzerland have kept their national service going to this day. However, most did away with it. Anybody ever been to those 2 countries? Just terrific. Wonder why. The world was against young people in 2022. Well, so they told everybody. They were dismayed, they were disillusioned, and they were disposable. I think there was a Swedish hobbit at the time. She had some famous quote like, "You ruined my dreams." I mean, I can't tell you what those dreams were. Who knows? Maybe she just wanted to have furniture that came already assembled. Who knows? All I can do is speculate. So the idea was, if you were under the age of 21, you had to work in hospitality. There was no avoiding it. The goal from Mr. Oldman and Mr. Musk was that the government would fund a program and pay 50% of all individuals' wages and put them in hospitality for 1 year. Is that some of you clapping there at the back? I agree. Quite right. Let's give a big hand. Quite simple, but a genius idea. Now, that member of staff, now in hospitality, could move between jobs, but as I say, they had to stay in hospitality for 1 year. The hope was that being in hospitality would be education enough to set them up for life. You see, what was being taught in schools was being peppered and tarnished by teachers' own personal and political agendas. Even the people that work for the Googles and the Facebooks and things like that, they had their own agenda and they were starting to force it on everybody else. Also, the good teachers, they just didn't stand a chance. Pupils were being offended at every single turn. The teachers couldn't teach. Some schools at the time were even introducing gender conversations to 6-year-olds, asking if they would like to be a boy, a girl, or a unicorn. I know, it's crazy. What was that? Say it a bit louder at the back, please.
People should be what they want to be, without fear of physical or verbal abuse.
Great point. I think we would all agree with that. However, I think we would also all agree that it's not a conversation for a person of 6 years old that still believes in Father Christmas and the Tooth Fairy. Would we agree on that one? Let's be honest. If a 5-year-old can make that decision, well, why don't we just give them the vote? What do you think about that? Kids were leaving school confused. Then they were going into higher education and blaming the world, and certainly the older generation, for the situation that they were in, which really wasn't a bad situation at all, so it seems. They wanted everything now. Well, they didn't. They wanted it yesterday. Wize Oldman thought that some of these young people had no life experience at all, even though they acted like they knew everything. So hospitality, being one of the greatest educations to give you a backbone and prepare you for life, seemed to be the only solution. You may be thinking, Jesus, that's quite the idea. But I'm sure a lot of people wouldn't have liked that. To be honest, the only people that didn't like it were the people under 21. The government liked it. Parents thought it was completely wonderful. Small businesses, of course, totally welcomed it. And customers? Well, they were lapping it up. They were going to get great service again. Then after a year or so, when the younger people started to infiltrate back into society, it all changed. The mood, the attitude. Young people were emerging like a phoenix from the flames. They were different than before. They were not whining at working weekends. They didn't complain, and they didn't moan that they didn't get a break for 4 hours. They didn't even care that it was busy. They were saying, we want to be busier. I know, what a turnaround. From then on, the customer would get great service, and there would be enough staff, always. Staff with a great attitude, I might add. Well, that seems to be one problem solved. Also, small venues could function and stay in business. Nice, that's another problem solved. More and more people were creating new businesses because they applied for the government grant called the Wize Mosque Project, thus creating more employment. However, the main thing that the project solved was the fucking awful attitude of some of the staff in the industry. Those whiny, self-obsessed and entitled people that live their lives complaining and just waiting for God, or the person that ran Google, which is the same thing as God in their eyes, to give them 10,000 followers for miming to a song or teaching their dog to say the word sausages. They changed. And because they changed, the world started to get back to normal. The moral of the story, as Wize once wrote, it's now 2032, and we need to get over ourselves. This is the greatest time to be alive. We can soar across the sky like a bird. We can cross the world in a matter of hours, sail majestically in luxury across an ocean, and connect with anybody, anywhere at the flick of a switch. We, if we choose to, can look back at history, which is kind of what you're doing now, and all the hardships that have gone before, all the people that have died and battled to afford you, us, the way of life that we have. But you are crying in a storeroom because you have to work 8 hours. Wize could see where we were heading. His thinking was that there is more good than bad in the world. There are more people that want to do the right thing than the wrong thing. Don't let the 5% take over. Let's not pander to them. Let's be fair, but be strong and help each other out. When Wize Oldman won the Nobel Peace Prize, he didn't just win one category. It was like the third of the Lord of the Rings movies at the Oscars. He won the lot. The Nobel Committee said, quote, "Wize deserves all the prizes. It was the right thing to do." So where are Elton and Wize now? Elton, we think, is on another planet. Some say he always was. As for Wize, nobody knows, to be honest. After winning all the Nobel Peace Prizes, some say he was bumped off. Some say Elton bought Wize a planet next to his, and this is where he lives with his beautiful wife and a life of tranquility. Hang on a minute. To all you people listening, teacher reading this to students, Wize Oldman saving the day, hospitality national service, have a day off. Do you really think all that happened? What happened is we completely fucked ourselves. Do you remember those machines from episode 1 of the podcast? Let me clue you in. Now, I suggested maybe 20 minutes ago now that some say it was the work of the aliens and they may have been involved in the whole pandemic thing. Well, it was. They, the aliens, had been watching our shit for years. Not in a bad way. They were literally our guardians and they liked us at first, but we kept fucking it up. Hey, sure, they gave us some drugs in the 70s. We kind of chilled and loved everybody. It didn't last though. The 80s happened. The drugs got out of hand, and so it seems greed became good. The rest, well, it's history. So they, the aliens, started to send machines. Actually, the machines were here long before the 70s. By the way, all the inventors of any machine in history? Aliens. That's right. All sent to help us along. Of course, some machines ended up being created for evil, but hey, what can you do? Even aliens have the odd bad apple. What, you think that's a little bit far-fetched? Okay, let me remind you, in a Terminator movie, how many of you said, yeah, that could happen? Every second movie that's made was about being from outer space. Predator, Men in Black, Stranger Things. Why were we so fascinated by the whole thing? The X-Files, for Christ's sake. You sat through 11 seasons of that shit. The truth is out there. No, it's not. It's here. It's always been here, hiding in plain sight. They have been sending people to watch over us for decades. What, you don't find it strange that Tom Cruise looks younger now than he did 40 years ago? Tom, Donald Trump. Okay, that one was a prototype. Remember E.T.? That didn't stand for extraterrestrial, nor was it Elliot Taylor, E.T.'s young friend. It was Eric Trump. I know. Aliens. Even Sleepy Joe Biden. All aliens. To be fair, Joe has been dead for 150 years. He just gets recharged every night. It's kind of cheaper than sending him back. So pick one. Tesla, Edison, Oppenheimer. Okay, yeah, I know. Even Dave the Caveman who invented the wheel. Aliens. So what really happened was that in 2030, we, on this planet, were messing up so badly, certainly since the pandemic, one that the aliens actually caused just to see if we as people could come together as one world. Newsflash, we didn't. So between 2020 and 2030, they had 10 years of littering and infiltrating the world with aliens that looked like us. Then in 2030, they wiped 50% of us off the planet. Jesus fuck. Why? Well, because we were arseholes. Now, I know what you'd like to think at this point, and what you'd like to think is they only wiped off the bad people. No, that never happened. How did they know? It was random. What do they care? They had given us more than enough chances. So the real 2030 looked like this. Machines control. That's what we seemed to want anyway, wasn't it? The aliens thought, well, let's give the people what they always craved. However, from the outside looking in, the world looked no different. Businesses, on the whole, looked and pretty much functioned the same. People walked the streets and did what they've always done, with one slight change. Everything you did was monitored. Everything. Before, in 2022, when you thought everything was monitored, it really wasn't. But now, it was. Just like in 2022. You complain, you fight, you argue, you blame. You can still do all of those things in the new alien world, the one we now know. However, it's regulated. Example, teachers, professors in 2022 almost couldn't do their job because of the complaints from those pesky young people. They were always offended. However, in the new world, the students, or anybody for that matter, they can go for it. They can argue, complain, and they can be offended as much as they like. However, if the individuals or groups call out people, they have to be able to back up their statement or argument with facts. And if it's not upheld by the powers, they lose credit. 3 credits mean you can't use any devices whatsoever for 1 month. Now, here's the kicker. Based on the fact that the world is now controlled by devices, you are pretty much fucked. You know what? It was quite amazing to see. Lots of people, young and old to be fair, stopped being aggressive. Stopped being overly opinionated and getting involved in matters that they knew nothing about. If they had no skin in the game, they kind of had to mind their own fucking business. Let's face it, if you were going to get on your soapbox and complain, especially if you were trying to get somebody else in trouble, you had to be pretty sure you believed in what you were saying and that you could back up what you were saying with stone cold Steve Austin facts. Facts then became fairly fashionable again. For some of us, they never went out of fashion. Also, if this happened 3 times, if you got 3 full strikes in a single year, you lose 5 years of your life.
Jesus fucking Christ, that's a bit rich.
Whoa, people wouldn't have liked that. Fuck them. They had no rights. Life's tough, right? Totally. But that's beyond harsh. That's brutal. Okay, so when you think back and going boo-hoo, I'm working at the weekend, customer was a bit rude, or I'm crying in that Starbucks storeroom, maybe the teacher didn't address you by your preferred pronouns. Life, 2022. Not that tough after all, huh? You are thinking, well, we didn't have it that bad at all then, did we? The life that we had in 2022 was pretty sweet. On reflection, maybe we just didn't realize what we had and we didn't make the most of it. But you wish you could go back, huh? Hey, I'm not saying the New World Order is perfect, but it was either this or the world would consume itself. The way our guardians saw it, they're killing each other anyway. Let's speed it up. Some may suggest, what have the aliens ever done for us? Well, they restored the balance of the world. They saved the planet. They made us all respect one another and helped us all get along. We also, as humans on this planet, came to the realization that we didn't own. We were just renting. We had 0 rights. You may remember the best-selling book from 2032 by Wize, which he co-wrote with 106-year-old Sir David Attenborough, called I Told You to Look After the Planet, You're a Fucking Knob. So tell me, if you were given the choice, which would you prefer? Hospitality, national service for a year, or living in a world where you have 0 rights, and if you bitch too much, then your life gets instantly shorter? Exactly. I think that's a wise decision. To conclude, none of this happened. Or did it? You were never really listening to this. And who the fuck is Wize? Where did I pluck that name from? Was it all a dream? And I wonder if other people have had the same dream as me. But so much of this didn't make sense. The timelines were wrong. It was like a Tarantino film. It was full of holes. Well, I guess that's dreams for you. Why did I dream all of that, though? There has to be a reason behind the dream, doesn't there? Could it be that I am troubled about where we are now? Maybe we do need to change. Maybe we do need to be better and to be nicer to our fellow man. Fuck me. That's the last time I drink absinthe and tequila pina coladas. I hope you enjoyed that episode, everybody. I would also like it to be noted that I didn't have one drink during that episode. I mean, how could I? The episode didn't really happen. Am I right?
Not sure, really.
So just to finish, it would be lovely if you wrote in at some point to chat@wiseolban.club with your comments, thoughts, or a subject that you would like to see me cover. Also, love, like, and write a glowing review. That will be lovely. Not that you're being watched, of course. Now go away and be lovely to somebody. See you soon.